All about the Volkswagen diesel mess, next on Talking Cars. Hi there and welcome to Talking Cars with Consumer Reports. I'm Tom Mutchler.
I'm Mark Recton.
And I'm Jake Fisher.
From time to time, car companies have been caught cheating, exploiting loopholes in regulations and test procedures. But Volkswagen is embroiled in a scandal that, frankly, is shocking. The company has admitted to the EPA of cheating on emissions regulations for 482,000 Volkswagen and Audi TDI diesel cars sold here in America over the last 7 model years. The cars affected include the 2012 to 2015 Volkswagen Passat and Beetle, the 2009 to 2015 Volkswagen Golf, the 2009 to 2015 Volkswagen Jetta, the 2010 to 2015 Audi A3, and the car parked behind us, the 2015 Volkswagen Golf Sportwagen. Now, the implications of this for Volkswagen are staggering. The company may be in for up to $18 billion with a B, billion dollars in fines. The CEO of Volkswagen, Martin Winterkorn, has resigned. Volkswagen has stopped sale on any remaining TDIs, and they're not selling used TDIs either. 2016 Volkswagen TDIs are not certified for sale. Consumer Reports has suspended their recommendation of the TDI Jetta and Passat. But more important to us here at Consumer Reports are the consequences to the consumer. What does this mean for resale value, performance, reliability, and frankly, the fact that Volkswagen committed fraud through deceptive advertising? Before we get into this, if you own one of these cars, we'd love to hear from you. How is this issue affecting you? How do you feel about it? Giving us this information helps Consumer Reports better fight for you. We'd love you to go to our website. That's at consumersunion.org/VW-stories. Now, Mark, a big part of the irony here is that Volkswagen built these cars as clean diesel.
And so I think you have to go back to when these decisions were originally made. And if we're talking sort of early 2000s when the vehicles were being developed, this was sort of the height of hybrid hype. And Toyota was tearing up the sort of, we care about the earth and you can get great fuel economy. And it was really kind of trumping the green planet game. And Volkswagen's response was to come up with clean diesel, which on its face seemed like the holy grail. You got great fuel economy and you still got performance. I think a lot of Prius buyers were sort of, well, I'm doing good for the planet, but you floor the gas pedal and nothing much happens.
I mean, diesel had a previous perception of being, it is a dirtier technology. You have to do a lot more work in order to clean up diesel to give it to acceptable pollution levels.
And a lot of Americans remember that from the 70s, from the previous generation VW diesels as well as Oldsmobile diesels. These were terrible, terrible vehicles, and I think there's a lot of legacy memory that Americans had. So Volkswagen had a really big challenge to try and convince Americans that clean diesel really was clean. And clearly they convinced 482,000 of us, and many in the media, might I add, that this was the case.
Right. Jake?
Well, I'm one of them in the media, I suppose. So, yeah, one of our favorite cars has been the Volkswagen diesels. And in stick shift, I don't know how many people I've recommended that vehicle to, and a lot of them bought it. And, it's really unfortunate that they were kind of sold a bill of goods. I mean, we tested these vehicles. They perform great. The fuel economy is great. As Mark says, I mean, you compare it to a Prius. I mean, this is the car enthusiast's hybrid, right? It's the car enthusiast's way of being clean and caring about the environment and not using a lot of foreign oil. And it's really, really disappointing to find out that the whole time they've had these cars, and a lot of these people drive a lot of miles, right? I mean, this has always been vehicles that do great on the highway in terms of fuel economy. There's all these reports of people getting 50 miles per gallon and steady state cruising.
Always beating the EPA numbers.
Always beating the EPA numbers. And now we kind of understand why, because truly those EPA numbers were done on a dyno, and these EPA numbers may have been done in that state where the emissions controls were actually functioning.
So let's get into some of the technical parts of this. Mark, big picture, what did Volkswagen do wrong?
It essentially rigged the test. You put the car on the EPA dyno and it functioned cleanly. It told all the computers that this car completely passes all emissions tests. And then,
because cars, when they're being tested for emissions and fuel economy, are not being tested on the road. They're being tested inside in a climate-controlled lab to very set situation of parameters.
Correct. And then when Volkswagen took the car off the rig and sold it to customers, what they were experiencing on the road in terms of emissions was totally different, sometimes 40 times the EPA standard for nitrogen oxides, which are, it's bad for the planet, it leads to asthma and other respiratory problems. It's pretty dirty stuff. So the problem that Volkswagen has here is, for one, it has a polluting car that it said was clean. But the real problem is almost more of public relations, because it had true believers. It had people who really thought that this car was the holy grail of clean performance. And the betrayal is almost a bigger problem for Volkswagen than the actual commission of the error.
Jake?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's about trust. It's about, there's so many enthusiasts about these cars. I mean, people really, care about these cars. I mean, there's huge clubs. I mean, you go online, there's VW Vortex, there's TDI clubs. I mean, people really believe in these things. And, you have to be able to trust that company. I mean, if they're lying about, what they're doing in terms of emission, are they lying somewhere else? Is there some other test that they're cheating? And I think that's really, important when you're buying the car. I mean, we've seen stuff like this before. I mean, you look what, Hyundai went and they misstated or rigged the system for the fuel economy by 1 miles per gallon, and that really came and hurt them temporarily. But this is kind of greater than that.
Right. Technically, how did Volkswagen do this? How would they have rigged the system?
Well, I mean, the truth is that when you test these vehicles on a dynamometer, you have to tell the vehicle that it's on the dynamometer, because, as you know, I mean, all the cars have stability control, they're monitoring their wheel speed, and if you put the front wheels on a roller, the car kind of says, this ain't right, because
the back wheels
aren't turning. So it thinks it's slipping, right? I mean, think this through, right? If you get into snow and the front wheel starts spinning, what does your car do?
It cuts back
power. So how possibly could you do this test without telling the car something is going on? So there is a way to go and tell every one of these cars that you are now on a dynamometer and you're being tested. What they have chosen to do is said, well, since we know it's being tested, let's go change the way this car operates. And they put it into a way that it actually does meet those emissions. But once you get it off the dynamometer, you go to normal mode, now it's polluting more.
Right. Okay, so Volkswagen did this. They've admitted to doing this. So now consumers have these cars. There's a stigma floating around them. For years, one of the hallmarks of Volkswagen TDIs was that the TDI always had better resale value. They were always more in demand than the gasoline-powered cars. So now resale value is a question. But I mean, there's also questions of what's going to happen after the recall.
Okay, well,
what will the recall be? No one knows what the recall will be,
right,
even to fix these cars.
well, let's first talk about resale value and transaction price, because you could always get a screaming deal on a Golf or Jetta regular gas power, but the diesels always carried this premium, $3,000, or depending, I mean, and that was just the sticker price.
Starting at $1,000, maybe a bit more.
But once you started getting into the actual transaction price out the door, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, depending on the trim level, et cetera.
Sure.
So people are already paying a premium for this. They're paying a premium for the diesel fuel over regular gasoline. So this is an added expense over years, and there were all these models constructed of how many miles a year or over the life of a car do you need to drive a diesel to pay off the price difference. Well, if all of a sudden, because of the way the car is operating, if they have to do a recall repair to this vehicle, that changes that dynamic, where if all of a sudden the fuel economy that the diesel gets is more on par with a gasoline car, or even if it's just lower by a few miles per gallon, all of a sudden that changes the dynamic of, how you're paying all this premium for this car, and it's not really giving you a back-end benefit, which then makes the resale value suffer. So all of a sudden now, you start at a higher price and you ended at a higher price, but now you're starting at a higher price and are ending at a lower price, because who's going to want to pay that extra money for a diesel when it really doesn't do all that much more than a gas car? And I think that's a big exposure for Volkswagen. There'll probably be a class action suit claiming diminution of value, and that's where Volkswagen owners may have a chance of getting some compensation.
So there's even technical issues of, can these cars be sold? Can these cars be registered?
Well, obviously they're holding the sales on them, but there's not going to be a chance where they're actually going to penalize the owners of the cars. They did nothing wrong. So the people who own these cars are still going to be able to drive them. The question is about that fix. And from a technical standpoint, when you're designing an engine, right, there's a lot of different things you choose. And you're looking at, there's fuel efficiency, there is reliability, there is emissions, and there's power. And all of these things, you can't have it all. So you make compromises in whatever you're doing. And if you go and say, well, we're going to cheat over here, you can get a car that gets better fuel efficiency or better performance. If you're going to get the efficiency back, you have to pull it from somewhere else.
Right.
And to Mark's point, is we don't know what that's going to look like. Now, again, to get into the technical side of it, now this car behind us has what's called a urea treatment system. Okay, this was added in 2015. A lot of these cars out there don't have that, and it is unclear on how they're going to actually be able to make those emissions without that system. Maybe they have to retrofit it. That could be very expensive. If they don't, how else are they going to compromise the performance of this vehicle? And the bigger issue is looking forward. If you have to compromise diesels that much or to make them meet these emissions, we have looked at the test results that we have on gasoline engines. They're phenomenal lately, right? And we got mid-sized sedans getting 32 miles per gallon. We got small cars getting even greater. Is that delta worth it? What does that mean for the future of diesels?
Right, because you're looking at a Mazda 6, which is a good-sized mid-sized sedan, getting 32 miles per gallon overall. Most Volkswagen TDIs are floating around upper 30s, 36, 37, around there. Is that delta worth it for the added cost that you mentioned, that you've got more to pay? Diesel's typically more expensive. Also, like you said, we don't know what the fix is yet. Right now, floating around is anything from the idea that it could be a simple remapping of air-fuel mixtures, which kind of would lead to the question, why couldn't Volkswagen have just done that anyway?
Right.
Because they tried a fix earlier last year that didn't seem to work. All the way to those cars that do not have urea systems, retrofitting those, which is thousands of dollars worth of parts. Do they even comply then? Does Volkswagen wind up buying back cars? This is still early days in this whole scandal, and it'll be interesting to see what the fixes are and how consumers are being made right, for these cars.
Well, and this is the real question: is how does the consumer be made right? And yeah, okay. Say they go and they put in this urea treatment system and they retrofit it. Is it going to meet emissions? And what kind of durability is this? I mean, if I was an owner of this car, I would want a warranty on this, because if they go and do this heavy rework to my car, I don't know what's going to happen. But if that's it, I want some warranty that 6 months down the road, the thing's not malfunctioning and I'm out for it. A lot of these cars are out of warranty.
Yeah, I also want a warranty that if they change that air-fuel ratio, or they change how often the emission systems is working, that okay, so I'm firing a regenerative system. I'm cleaning out the catalyst more often, so I'm sending more fuel through it. Am I coking up pistons? Am I going to burn out catalytic converters? Am I using 3 times as much urea as I was using before? I want all this stuff warranted.
Sure.
And federal emission standards do require these systems to last for a certain period of time, and who knows if they would do that after the fix. So this brings us kind of to the question, is diesel done in America?
Oh, we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But I think for a lot of people, this is sparking, okay, so there's a lot of emotions behind this. People feel betrayed, but they're also worried about the issues that we just brought up. And they may just be saying, I'm done. I want to get rid of it. And so the question comes up, can you sell your TDI right now? And the answer, at least in California, is yes. The California Air Resources Board has said they're not going to stand in the way of either registering the car or selling the car, because technically the car does meet emissions. But that's their way of that's their long way of saying we need to wait to see what the recall repair is. Until that time, they're just going to leave it in state, and so you can transfer title and ownership and all that, and they're not going to stand in the way. Once the recall is announced, there's a window of time in which they still will allow you to sell it, because you don't have to have all recall repairs performed on a car when you sell it. That's a different issue that we want.
Yeah, that's...
But once it reaches a certain number of months, then you must have had the recall performed if it involves emissions from a CARB standpoint. So if you're really worried about your TDI and you just are like, I'm done with it, you can sell it.
But that, you raise an interesting point, because TDI owners, many of them have enjoyed the fact they've been getting several miles per gallon better than the EPA numbers. Now, keep in mind, those EPA fuel economy numbers would have been done with the car running emissions. So it's likely that after a recall, you're going to lose a couple miles per gallon. I've seen in those forums that you mentioned earlier, plenty of people are like, I'm not going to get the recall done because I'm happy with the way my car runs. But in some states, like California, that can cause you legal problems.
Well, and also I think there's an opportunity for whatever the whatever the fix is to make it so it's in the consumer's interest to get it done. I mean, okay, fine. Well, I might lose 1 mile per gallon or 2 miles per gallon, whatever it is, but now they're extending a warranty for me, and now maybe there's they're refunding me something. Maybe there's a cash settlement for those people that get it done. So I think they really have to. It's more about just fixing the cars. I mean, you have a 2009 car and you've been driving it for 200,000 miles, and and maybe you bought it because you care about the environment, and you're kind of a little racked off because
it's not so clean.
It's not so clean. They need to make restitution to those owners that are just farther than saying, oh, it's fixed now.
Okay, is diesel done in America? Is this the nail in the coffin?
I wouldn't call it a mortal blow. There are other manufacturers who have diesels.
But a lot of manufacturers have been trying to bring out diesels over the last couple of years, and they've all been stillborn. I mean, Subaru tried to bring it out, didn't happen. Honda tried to bring it. Honda mentioned bringing it out, tried, didn't. Mazda's been trying to do it, and they've said that they haven't been able to meet performance and fuel economy hopes for the added cost, which kind of points to this whole issue, because they were trying to do it without urea too. So, other than like a Ram diesel or a Grand Cherokee or a Mercedes SUV diesel, does diesel make sense? Can diesel work?
Well, okay, the market's going to decide. And for all the marketing that automakers can do proclaiming how great diesel is, if Americans don't feel comfortable with it, they're not going to buy it. And as long as there's a price premium, not only on the vehicle itself, but on the fuel, that makes it a really hard argument. And the one thing that Volkswagen had on its side was that they were saying, no, it's clean. Well, if diesel is just as dirty as gas, and the price delta to get your money back from buying the vehicle is that much longer, it makes it a really hard retail decision for a consumer.
Right.
It makes it, unless you need a diesel for a specific purpose, like you're towing a boat or you just really love that low-end torque, what's the argument to be made to get it?
The other big piece is the market has changed. So back in 2009, Volkswagen's alternative engine was that 2.5 liter engine, which it was kind of a boat anchor. It was not a competitive motor. Now the new engine, the 1.8, that is a silky smooth, powerful, and efficient engine.
Well, you also had a world of less compelling hybrids too. Of pretty much you had the Prius and maybe the Camry hybrid. You didn't have these cars like the Fusion hybrid or the C-Max hybrid that were dynamic to drive as well as offering good fuel economy with an alternative to diesel.
Well, I mean, with hybrids, I think there's kind of another segment. I'm thinking about it in just terms of when you look at the alternative of a diesel versus a gas-powered. That delta in terms of fuel economy has really narrowed. I mean, we talked about Mazda. Mazda talked about how they're going to have a Mazda 6 with a diesel. Suddenly they got Skyactiv, and they're getting 32 miles per gallon of their gas engine, which is a silky smooth, powerful engine that's delivering great performance, emissions.
Right.
I hope so.
Oh, yes, I hope so.
And fuel economy. So what we've seen over the last 5 years, I mean, it really hasn't been that far. We've seen new technologies in gasoline that just brought them so much further. Direct injection, multi-speed transmissions, high compression when it comes to Skyactiv and what Mazda's doing, that gap is narrow so much that, again, we've talked about it in podcasts. I've said, I don't know if I'd go for a diesel, and people tweeted me and said, what are you talking about? You always said diesels were good. I mean, the gap has changed because the market's changed.
Right. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the podcast. We're going to keep on following this story. As always, please come to consumerreports.org and we'll give you the latest. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.